What do you owe a stranger when helping them could cost other people the thing they need to survive? A civilian driver carrying vital equipment finds a wounded officer from the opposing side in a wrecked craft. She asks for one destination. He has another. Where should either of them go? Join the story. Bryce Calder had learned that a road could look open right up to the second it decided to kill you. The route through Kestrel Basin had been marked green on his dash 20 minutes earlier. It had been a narrow green line between two orange hazard fields, ugly but usable. Now the green line was gone under a wall of dust that climbed from the valley floor to the low, iron-colored clouds. The iron lark shuddered as another shock wave reached it. Bryce tightened his hands on the wheel. The old transport truck answered with a complaint from somewhere under the hood, deep and metallic. Yeah, he told it. I agree. Bad weather. Bad neighborhood. Terrible timing. The cabin filter whined. Fine metal dust rattled against the armored windshield like dry rain. Kestrel Basin had once been a chain of mining towns and processing yards. Most of its long roads were built to haul or from pits to launch towers. War had made those roads useful for everything else. Troop movements, evacuation lines, ambushes, and people trying to get home before somebody decided home belonged to the other side. Behind Bryce, in the cargo bay, two life support filter modules sat locked into their braces. Each was about the size of a small refrigerator. Both had been built to scrub enough air for a bunker full of civilians. A separate emergency power pack rested between them, sealed in a shock case. The shelter ahead had sent 3 messages in the last hour. Its air reserves were falling, its medical wing had closed, and the last note asked him not to turn around. Bryce did not plan to turn around. He had promised the shelter manager he would get there before their reserve systems dropped into emergency rationing. He needed the payment, needed the license renewal that came with a clean run, and needed to stop pretending that old debts became less real when you ignored them. A burst of blue-white. Light flashed through the dust on his left. The iron lark rocked hard enough that Bryce's shoulder struck the door. The forward scanner filled with static. Then a sharp tone began to sound. Come on, Bryce muttered. Give me something useful. The scanner showed 3 shapes where the main freight road should have been. One was a military carrier lying across both lanes. Another was a collapsed cargo crane. The third was a burning fuel hauler whose fire had turned the road surface into a black shimmer. No route through. Bryce looked at the map. To the east, Vera Ridge cut across the basin. The ridge was a bad choice in good weather. The old freight tunnels inside it had been partly sealed after the mining companies left. The ground was unstable, and both armies had used the slopes for observation posts at different times. He turned the wheel anyway. The iron lark slipped off the marked road and climbed onto a maintenance track that had not been maintained in years. The truck's suspension groaned. Bryce kept one eye on the temperature gauge. The engine was already working too hard in the dust. A red symbol blinked on the edge of the display. Not a route marker. A survival beacon. It pulsed weakly from somewhere ahead, near the base of the ridge. Bryce swore under his breath and drove past it. The beacon pulsed again. He drove another 100 yards. Then the dash translated the source signature through the static. It reported a pilot compartment losing pressure, with 6 minutes left before the air failed. Bryce shut his eyes for half a second. Of course, he said. He had seen enough people die inside crushed vehicles to know the sound of a failing cabin. The beacon used Meridian Coalition equipment from the other side of the war. The rational thing was to keep moving. The contract was civilian, the bunker needed air, and the truck was already carrying more responsibility than one man could handle. But a person was still breathing in that wreck. Bryce swung the iron lark around. The source was a small scout craft wedged nose first into a slope of broken shale. Its wing was gone. The fuselage had been peeled open on one side, and a trail of scorched debris led back toward the basin. Bryce parked with the engine running. Leaving it off in the dust would make it hard to restart. Leaving it on made the iron lark a bright thermal target. He grabbed his rescue cutter, a compact air bottle, and a roll of seal fabric from the cab. The scout craft had the clean lines of Meridian design, all smooth armor and recessed panels. Bryce had spent enough years around wrecks to know where the emergency hatch would be. He found it half buried under rock. Hey, He shouted through the metal. "If you can hear me, I'm cutting in." No answer. The cutter bit into the hatch seam. Sparks snapped away into the dust. Bryce braced his boots as the slope trembled under him. Somewhere overhead, a distant engine screamed through the sky. The hatch dropped inward. A woman in dark field armor was pinned beneath a collapsed restraint frame. Her helmet was off. Her skin was a muted silver gray, marked by thin darker lines along her cheekbones and throat. Her eyes opened at once, sharp and alert despite the blood at one temple. She was not unconscious. She was not waiting. One hand was locked around a small device at her collar. With the other, she was trying to pull a broken signal tag free from the armor at her shoulder. Bryce climbed inside. "You're welcome," he said. Her gaze snapped to him. "Do not touch the tag." "Great. Nice to meet you too. Take me to Hollowgate Station." Bryce looked at the crushed frame pinning her leg. "You're in no shape to request a scenic tour." "Hollowgate? Now?" The answer is no. A low alarm began to chirp in the cockpit. Pressure falling. She shifted, gritted her teeth, and held out the device in her hand. It projected a map above her palm. The image jumped and tore in the cabin's failing air. Bryce saw a long corridor of roads leading through the basin. Small white symbols moved along it, dozens of them, then hundreds. Civilian vehículos. Across the map, a red arc spread outward. "Sable array," she said. Her voice was controlled, but urgency strained through it. "It is entering autonomous fire sequence." Bryce stared at the red arc. "I don't know what that is." "It is a ground defense network. It will fire on every vehicle in Darson corridor. Then warn them. If they scatter now, they will enter the preloaded lanes." "Preloaded for what?" "For targets labeled as enemy armor." She met his eyes. "Those targets are civilians." The pressure alarm changed pitch. Less than 3 minutes. Bryce did not have time to decide whether she was lying. He had time to decide whether to leave a wounded person in a dying cockpit. He cut the restraint frame away. She did not cry out when the metal came free. She only bit down on the edge of her glove and reached for the signal tag again. Bryce caught her wrist. "You can either let me get you out or keep arguing with me while the air runs out." For the first time, something close to surprise crossed her face. Then she handed him the tag. "Remove it," she said. "The coalition will track it. Now we're getting somewhere." He ripped the tag free, wrapped it in seal fabric, and shoved it under a loose plate beside the pilot's seat. Then he lifted her carefully. Her injured leg barely held weight. She was lighter than he expected, but she moved with the practiced balance of someone used to being hurt and continuing anyway. They made it back to the Iron Lark as the scout craft gave one last crackling groan behind them. Bryce got her into the passenger seat and closed the door. She reached for the dash controls. He slapped her hand away. "You can sit. You can breathe. You can tell me why I just risked the only delivery that matters today. You do not get to drive my truck." "I was not trying to drive. You were reaching for a control panel. That is suspicious behavior in a passenger." The corner of her mouth moved, almost a reaction, but it vanished before it became a smile. "My name is Vaelis Rhyne," she said. "I need to reach Hollowgate Station. Bryce Calder. And I need to reach a bunker with people who would prefer not to suffocate." The truck lurched forward. On the ridge above them, a small drone rose through the dust. Then another, and another. Vaelis watched them through the side window. They found the tag. Bryce glanced at her. "You said you removed it." "I did." Apparently, it had friends. The first drone turned toward the Iron Lark. Vaelis braced one hand against the dash. "There's a freight tunnel ahead. It will take us below the ridge." "Will it hold?" "No." Bryce gave her a quick look. "Then why are you suggesting it?" "Because the drones cannot fit inside." "That is not the same as a good idea." "It is the only idea." Bryce pushed the truck harder. "That is becoming a theme." The tunnel entrance appeared through the dust, half hidden by a fallen or conveyor. The opening was narrow. The Iron Lark would clear it with inches to spare. Behind them, the drones accelerated. Bryce aimed for darkness. The first drone fired as the truck crossed the threshold. A bright impact burst against the rear armor. The Iron Lark slammed into the tunnel, scraping metal along both walls. The cabin lights flickered. Vaelis grabbed the overhead rail with one hand and the seat with the other. Her injured leg shifted. Pain tightened her face, but she did not make a sound. "Turn off the engine," she said. Bryce laughed once. "We are rolling downhill in a collapsing tunnel while being hunted. Your timing is impressive." They are tracking heat and active power. There is a secondary ventilation shaft ahead. When the tunnel's old electrical system pulses, the shaft will flood their sensors. "You know this for certain?" "No, I know it is likely." Comforting. 3 seconds. Bryce saw nothing but black tunnel ahead and the weak beam of his lights. He cut the engine. The iron lark coasted. For one long second, there was only the rattle of loose tools and the scrape of tires over broken stone. Then the tunnel lights flashed on all at once, a pale yellow stutter that ran ahead of them like lightning trapped in a pipe. Vaelis said now. Bryce pulled the wheel left. The iron lark slid into a side shaft just as a drone entered the main tunnel behind them. Its sensors flooded in the sudden electrical surge. It fired at the warmest shape it could see. An abandoned or hauler exploded in a shower of dust and metal. The blast shook the tunnel. Rock fell behind the truck. Bryce restarted the engine and drove through the side shaft as the main passage collapsed. When the dust settled, the way back was gone. His radio hissed, tried to form a message, and died. Vaelis looked at the blacked-out display. "The long-range radio array is damaged," she said. Bryce exhaled slowly through his nose. One road in, one road out. No radio. Enemy officer with a broken leg. "This delivery is going beautifully." Vaelis turned toward him. "You can still leave me at the next shelter." "No," Bryce said. "I can leave you at Hollowgate, get the exact coordinates, and then decide whether you're worth the trouble." "That is not trust. It is the best offer I have." She looked out at the tunnel wall, sliding past. "Then I will earn it." For the next several minutes, neither of them spoke. Outside, the war kept moving. Inside the Iron Lark, the clock had already started. Hollowgate Station had once handled freight transfers beneath the ridge. By the time Bryce and Vaelis reached it, half the building was buried and the other half was dark. The station's main doors stood open just enough for the Iron Lark to force its way through. Inside, empty loading platforms disappeared into shadow. Old cargo tracks crossed beneath hanging cranes. Dust lay thick over everything except a few fresh boot prints near the central control room. Bryce noticed them first. Someone else was here. Vaelis leaned forward. "Recent, not from today. Dust has settled over the edges." "That does not make me feel better." It was not meant to. Bryce parked beside a bank of dead control panels and opened the cargo bay. He checked the filter modules. Their braces had held. The emergency power pack showed full charge, but its outer case had taken a scrape. Vaelis tried to stand without help. Her leg folded under her. Bryce caught her elbow before she hit the floor. "I can walk," she said. "Sure, and I can sing. Neither of us should do it right now." She gave him a narrow look. He helped her toward the control room anyway. The station's emergency panel accepted power from the Iron Lark's smaller backup battery. Bryce connected a cable while Vaelis placed her hand against a biometric plate. The panel stayed dark for 3 seconds. Then it came alive in fragments. Old screens blinked. A map unfolded above the console. The basin appeared as a wireframe of roads, tunnels, buried power lines, and tiny moving symbols. Vaelis went still. Bryce watched the map fill with red. "Tell me something useful." "The array has completed its warm-up phase." Her voice had gone quieter. "It is no longer waiting for manual confirmation." "How long?" 4 hours, perhaps less. "The system has lost too many relay points. It is correcting for damage." "Correcting how?" "By shortening the decision cycle." Bryce looked at the mass of civilian markers in Darson Corridor. The corridor was a wide strip of road and rail running between 2 old refinery fields. It was the fastest route out of the basin. It was also directly inside the red area. "Can we contact them?" Vaelis ran through menus. "Not safely. The open bands are flooded with false alerts and military traffic. If we send a broad warning without a precise route, they may spread into 3 separate kill zones. So we need a route. We need access to the target map. And we need to stop the firing cycle." Bryce pointed at a pale blue icon near the edge of the red zone. What's that? A guiding station. One of the places that tells the buried launchers where to aim. Can we shut it down? Not from here. Can we reach it? Vaelis looked at the path. The shortest route cut through an abandoned industrial district. It is possible, she said. Bryce folded his arms. That word always means I'm about to have a bad afternoon. She looked at him, then at the cargo bay visible through the control room door. The emergency power pack in your truck can wake a manual control line. It was designed for life support systems, but it can drive an old relay long enough to give us access. And then I get my power pack back? Maybe, if the relay survives. Bryce stared at her. She did not look away. He understood the choice without either of them naming it. The bunker needed power. The corridor needed a route. If he gave up the pack, he might save hundreds of people now and fail the people who were waiting for him later. I have 2 air modules, he said, and the shelter has nothing. Then we do not use a module. You just said the pack might not survive. I said the relay might not survive. The pack is protected. It should be recoverable. The relay may also need a few minutes from one filter module's capacitor matrix to smooth the load, Vaelis said. Only at the end, after the convoy is moving. If the housing holds, we recover it. Should be. Yes. He rubbed a hand over his face. Vaelis said, you do not have to come. Bryce looked at the map again. He saw the moving civilian symbols, small and steady, heading toward the red zone because nobody had told him it was red. I know, he said. He unplugged the backup battery and turned toward the Iron Lark. Let's go ruin somebody's plan. Vaelis kept working at the station terminal while Bryce checked the structural supports around the control room. The place had been dead long enough that every sound felt borrowed. Water dripped through a split pipe. A cargo belt clicked once every few seconds somewhere in the dark. The station had no business still having power, but old infrastructure rarely died all at once. It simply became unreliable in ways that got people hurt. Show me the path, Bryce said. Vaelis expanded the map. A white route appeared, then broke into fragments where the data was damaged. The array's core is under the old command ridge, she said. From Hollowgate, we can reach one outer guiding station through Ashline Works. The center is farther east, and the launchers? Buried in arcs around the corridor. They fire upward through armored vents. The rails are fixed, but the guiding stations alter the aim. Meaning if we get to one station, we can point them away. Not safely. One station can only change a small part of the firing solution. If we push it too far, the other stations correct it. Then we shut down all of them. Vaelis hesitated. That is harder than it sounds. Everything today has been harder than it sounds. She tapped the screen. The array was designed so a single damaged station could not disable the rest. Each station compares timing pulses with the central chamber. If one becomes unreliable, the others isolated. If all of them disagree at once, the system assumes the ground network is compromised and protects the launch rails by shutting down. Bryce followed the lines on the map. So we create disagreement. With power the outer station does not expect, while I open its internal lock from the center. And the system destroys itself. It shuts down its command structure and burns out the routing lattice. The launchers remain buried, but blind. That sounds permanent. It is permanent enough. Bryce nodded slowly. What's the bad part? Vaelis looked down at her hand. The dark lines along her fingers had tightened in color, almost blue beneath the skin. The central lock is designed around the field sense of my species. It reads nervous patterns, not only a handprint. The closer I get to the core, the more the array will draw on the same sensory channels I use to read it. Meaning I can find the hidden routes. I can also lose my sense of balance. My memories may blur for a time. If the overload is strong enough, I may not be able to tell one signal from another. Bryce's expression hardened. You failed to mention that in the truck. I did not know how close we would need to get. You knew enough. I knew it would not help to say it while we were being chased. That is not your decision. No, Vaelis said. It is not. The words sat between them. Bryce had no good reply. He had made his own choices for her more than once already. He had pulled her from the wreck without asking. He had decided where to drive. He had decided he could carry every consequence himself. Still, he said, next time you tell me before your brain starts catching fire. Vaelis looked at him. Fair, she said. The terminal flashed again. A buried command log appeared for only a second before part of it corrupted. Bryce caught a name in the authorization chain. It was Orventau. Vaelis reached for the screen, but the entry vanished. Your commander? Bryce asked. Former commander. You think he did this? I think he had the access. That is not the same thing. No. Her face had gone still. It is worse. It means I do not know whom I can trust. The station's exterior sensors clicked alive. A distant skin beam swept past the walls. Bryce unplugged the backup battery. Then, we trust the problem in front of us, he said. We get to the next station. We learn what we can. And we keep everyone alive who is still reachable. Vaelis studied him. That is not a plan either. It is more of one than we had 10 minutes ago. For the first time, she did not argue. The industrial district had no name on Bryce's map. It was just a mesh of old factories, conveyor lines, rail beds, and processing towers. Vaelis called it a shortcut. Bryce called it a machine graveyard with bad lighting. The Iron Lark entered through a gate hanging off one hinge. Inside, the old automated systems were still moving. A cargo arm swung across the road with no cargo in its grip. A rail carrier rolled past on an elevated track, empty except for a pile of scrap. Overhead, a crane lowered a steel container into a pit and raised it again, repeating the motion without purpose. Why is all this running? Bryce asked. Emergency industrial programs, Vaelis said. They keep operating until a central shutdown order arrives. And nobody sent one? Not after the fighting began. Efficient. A sharp pulse of pain crossed Vaelis's face. Bryce noticed. What? There's a guiding station under us. You can feel it? Not feel. More like a pressure pattern. Is that useful? It tells us the road ahead is unstable. Of course it does. The truck's front tires hit a patch of metal flooring. The surface groaned. Vaelis gripped the dash. Brake. Bryce braked hard. The floor ahead collapsed into a dark shaft. The Iron Lark stopped with its front bumper hanging over open space. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Bryce breathed out. You could have led with pit. I did not know it was a pit. You knew it was something. I was being precise. Bryce backed the truck away inch by inch. The sound of engines rose behind them. Not drones this time. Ground vehicles. Vaelis looked at the rear camera. Harlan Kiev, you recognize his driving style? Irakumiza qualitiun pursuit units. 3 armored skimmers appeared through the gate. Their markings were meridian. They moved low and fast over the broken road. Bryce swore. Vaelis said they want me alive. That makes them polite, not harmless. The first skimmer fired a signal flare. It burst above the district, sending a coded pulse through the dust. The automated cranes shifted. Bryce looked at Vaelis. What was that? A request to local systems. They're trying to close routes. Can you stop it? Not from here. Then we improvise. He drove toward the rail yard. The Iron Lark was too slow for the skimmers on open ground. Bryce knew that. He also knew the skimmers needed room to maneuver. He aimed for a narrow path between stacked steel containers. Vaelis watched the industrial map flicker across her device. At the end of this lane, there is a loading lift. Can it carry us? No, that is a useless detail. It can carry the containers. Bryce grinned, despite himself. Now you're speaking my language. He hit the release control for the truck's exterior floodlights. The bright beams flashed across the lane. The lead skimmer followed, trying to keep target lock. Bryce cut right at the last second. Vaelis tapped a symbol on the map and sent a short-range pulse through the Iron Lark's transmitter. The loading lift woke. A row of containers dropped from overhead. The lead skimmer slammed brakes. One container struck its front edge, not crushing it, but shoving it sideways into a rail barrier. The second veered around it. The third fired at the truck. The shot hit a cargo crane. Metal screamed. The crane's arm folded down across the lane behind Bryce. He drove through a gap barely wider than the Iron Lark. The truck scraped both sides. Sparks flashed along the doors. When they emerged on the other side, Bryce saw a narrow service tunnel ahead. Tell me that's our route. Vaelis checked the display. It is not. Perfect. It leads beneath the guiding station. That is close enough. They plunged into the tunnel just as the crane collapsed behind them, blocking the pursuit vehicles from following directly. Bryce drove until the only sound was the engine and the steady breathing of the woman beside him. Vaelis's hand had curled tightly around the edge of the seat. Her eyes were closed. "You all right?" he asked. "The signal field is stronger down here." "That means no. It means I need a minute." Bryce slowed the truck. "We don't have one," she said. "Everybody gets one. It's a rule. I did not know humans had rules. We have lots. We just ignore them when convenient." That did it. A brief, unwilling laugh escaped her. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. It changed something in the cab. Not much. Not enough to be trust, but enough for Bryce to remember that she was not only a uniform, a wound, and a problem. At the end of the tunnel, the service passage opened onto the broken span of a transport bridge. Glass span. The name made sense. The bridge had once been covered by transparent panels that protected freight from the basin storms. Most of the panels were gone now. The long structure hung over a deep channel of black rock and old pipes. On the far side, a line of civilian vehicles waited. Some had lights on, some did not. People stood beside them, waving cloth strips and hand lamps. The nearest section of bridge had collapsed. Bryce stopped. Vaelis looked at the clock in the corner of the screen. 3 hours and 12 minutes, she said. Bryce could see the route around the bridge. It was long, too long. "We keep moving," he said. Vaelis looked at the people across the gap. "No." He turned to her. "No. You told me you were taking air to a shelter. I am. And you're telling me we should leave these people on a bridge inside the target zone. I'm telling you that if the array fires, everybody in the corridor dies. We can come back with a route. You know we may not." "Vaelis." She met his gaze. "If we only save the people we can see on a map," she said, "then I have no reason to do any of this." Bryce felt anger rise, not at her exactly, but at the way she made the choice impossible. "Your system is about to shoot them." "Our system," she said. "You have driven contract through this war long enough to know who keeps the roads open for it." The words landed harder than he expected. He looked away. Across the gap, someone was trying to move a stretcher from one vehicle to another. Bryce let out a breath. "Fine," he said. "We build a bridge." Vaelis studied him. "You are agreeing?" "I'm agreeing that this is a terrible idea. There's a difference." The first person to reach them was a human man with grease on his face and a battered tool belt around his waist. "Toma Ven," he said. "You have anything that can lift?" Bryce looked at the wrecked bridge, then at the old construction vehicle parked near the edge. Not enough, but maybe enough parts. Sela Oren stepped forward from the group behind him. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried herself like someone who had been keeping frightened people focused for several days. Her face was lined with dust and exhaustion. "We have 37 people," she said. 9 injured. For vehicles that still move. One of them has a cracked axle. We cannot stay here." "You won't," Bryce said. "But nobody moves until we know the load limit." Vaelis limped toward the broken span, scanning the floor with her device. She crouched, placed her hand against the support beam, and closed her eyes. Bryce watched her for a moment. Then he turned to Toma. "You know that loader? I used to maintain them. Can you make it pull?" "With power." Bryce glanced toward the Iron Lark. The emergency power pack sat in the cargo bay like a promise he hated needing. "No," he said. "Not the pack. Use the loader's own reserve." Toma shook his head. "Reserve cell is dead." Bryce looked back at Vaelis. She had opened her eyes. "The central spine can support single vehicles. Not 2 at once. The outer rails will collapse." "Good," Bryce said. "That's more bridge than we had." For the next hour, the war disappeared behind the immediate work. Bryce and Toma stripped armored panels from a wrecked carrier. Sela organized the civilians into teams without shouting. 2 people moved medical supplies. 3 cleared loose debris. Vaelis marked safe points along the bridge with small light beacons, using the faint pulse from the buried guiding station to judge where the supports still held. Bryce used the old loader to drag a length of freight frame across the gap. It bowed under its own weight. Toma welded braces into place with a portable cutter. Bryce climbed onto the frame to secure the far end while the channel wind pushed dust through the broken panels. When he looked down, the drop below was nothing but darkness and broken pipes. "Try not to fall," Vaelis called from the near side. Bryce looked back. "That was the plan. I appreciate the reminder." "You are welcome." It was almost a smile. The first vehicle crossed at walking speed. The bridge groaned but held. The second made it halfway before one of the support braces slipped. Bryce jumped down from the frame, caught the loose brace with a magnetic clamp, and shouted for the driver to stop. Vaelis moved to the edge of the span, ignoring the pain in her leg. She watched the vibration traveling through the supports. "3 steps forward," she called. "Then stop. Do not turn the wheel." The driver obeyed. Bryce pulled the brace into place. Toma locked it. The vehicle moved again. A drone appeared above the far ridge. Then another. Scylla saw them. "We do not have time." "Keep them moving," Bryce said. The drones were not close enough to fire yet, but they were close enough to report. Vaelis looked at the dark sky. "Harlan will know we stopped. Then let's make the stop count." The last vehicle crossed just as the first drone dropped lower. Bryce ran back to the Iron Lark. The truck cargo bay had been opened to retrieve tools. Inside, one filter module was still intact. The other had taken dust damage during the tunnel run, but could still function at reduced capacity. He looked at both. Then he pulled the damaged one free from its braces. "Tomasterth, what are you doing?" "Using it as a thermal sink. The truck will cook it. It will keep the engine alive through the storm." "And the shelter?" Bryce met his eyes. "The other module stays." "Tomanderstuth." They wired the damaged module into the Iron Lark's cooling loop. It was not what it had been made for. It was not elegant. It was what they had. Vaelis climbed back into the passenger seat after helping the last injured person across. "You gave up part of your delivery," she said. "I gave up the part that was already damaged. It was still useful. Everything is useful when you're desperate." She looked at him for a long moment. Then, she reached across the space between them and set her hand lightly over his on the wheel. Not gratitude, not romance, recognition. Bryce started the engine. Behind them, Glasspan gave one final groan and collapsed into the channel, erasing the path they had used. Ahead, the people they had just saved formed a slow, uneven line through the dust. And somewhere beneath the ground, Sable Array kept counting down. The road beyond Glasspan narrowed into a trench between abandoned storage mounds. Scylla placed the fastest vehicles in front, but she kept walking between the groups instead of riding in one of the trucks. Bryce watched her through the rear mirror. "She should be in a vehicle," he said. "She says the walkers see more than the drivers," Vaelis replied. "She says that because she is the person who has to calm everyone. That is also a skill." Bryce glanced at her. Vaelis was looking at the convoy, not at him. "You judge usefulness by whether it can stop a door from falling or make an engine run. Those are useful things." "Yes, they're not the only useful things." Before he could answer, the second group stopped. Scylla's voice came over the local channel. "Axle failure. Small carrier. We need 5 minutes." Bryce checked the time. Less than 2 hours and 40 minutes. "Leave it," he said. The silence that followed was immediate. Then Scylla answered, "It holds 3 injured people." Bryce swore softly. The Iron Lark pulled alongside the broken carrier. Its rear wheel had split at the hub. The vehicle could not move without a replacement part, and there was no replacement part. Toma crouched beside it. "We can lock the axle with a brace. It will limp, but it will move." "How long?" Bryce asked. "Long enough if we do not hit another crater." That is a sentence people say before hitting another crater. Toma gave him a tired look. "You want it fixed or not?" Bryce grabbed the tool case. As they worked, Vaelis stood at the edge of the trench. Her head tilted slightly, reading the field beneath the ground. "2 drone sweeps," she said. "One from the ridge, one from the refinery side." "How long?" Bryce asked. 7 minutes. Toma's hands kept moving. Then, "We have 6. Bryce slid beneath the carrier and braced the axle with a section of rail clamp salvage from Glasspan. The work was dirty and cramped. The dust worked into his gloves and throat. Above him, one of the injured civilians groaned. Bryce looked toward the open door. "You're all right." "We're moving." The woman inside nodded once, pale but awake. He had said the same words to people too many times. Sometimes they were true. Sometimes they were only what a person could offer. When the brace locked, Toma slapped the side of the carrier. "Try it." The driver eased forward. The wheel turned. A drone sound whined above the ridge. "Move," Vaelis said. The convoy moved. Bryce ran back to the Iron Lark. Vaelis climbed into the cab after him, breathing harder than she should have been. "You used the field sense again," he said. "I used it for seconds. That is still using it. And it got them moving." He started the engine. For a while, they drove in silence. The damaged filter module beneath the cargo floor hissed louder. Bryce knew it was dying by degrees, turning clean air capacity into engine survival. Vaelis finally said, "At glass span, you did not have to stop." "No, you still did. You made that hard to avoid. I gave you a reason." Bryce glanced at her. "That is what you call it." "What would you call it?" "A very effective form of guilt." Her eyes narrowed, but not angrily. "You believe I used you. I believe you knew I would not leave them." "I knew you would not," Vaelis said. "That is different." The answer unsettled him because it was honest. She continued, "I did not know whether you would help me. I knew you would help people in front of you. I chose the action I could take." Bryce thought about that as the convoy entered a field of broken refinery pipes. "You always talk like a commander?" "Only when people are about to die. That is often enough to be annoying." This time her smile came all the way through. It lasted only a moment, but Bryce found himself smiling back. Ahead, Quiet Line turned west, just as the first drones swept over the ridge behind them. They were too high to identify individual vehicles through the dust. Sealess. 3 groups had become separate moving shadows. The drones passed. Nobody cheered. They simply kept moving. That was how Bryce knew the plan had worked. The route from Glasspan to the old maintenance station was no longer a route. It was a moving problem. Sela had split the civilians into 3 groups, as Vaelis suggested. The first group carried the fastest vehicles and most of the able-bodied drivers. The second moved with the injured and the remaining medical supplies. The third stayed between them, close enough to relay signals, but far enough apart that a single strike could not take everyone. Bryce hated it. He hated seeing people separated. He hated knowing the slower group would be harder to protect. He hated that Vaelis was right. "We are making them smaller targets," she said as they watched the groups move through a low service road. "We are making them easier to lose. We are making it possible for some to survive if the worst happens." Bryce kept his eyes on the road. "That is not the same thing." "No," Vaelis said quietly. "It is not." The Iron Lark's engine ran hot. The damaged filter module hissed beneath the cargo floor as it pulled heat from the overloaded system. Bryce watched the temperature gauge climb anyway. A tight burst of static came through the radio. Then a voice. "Bryce Calder. Respond." He froze. The voice was calm, familiar, and too clear for the ruined airwaves. "Maris Danton." Bryce did not answer. "Bryce," Maris continued, "I know you can hear me. The coalition officer in your vehicle has access to Sable Array. Bring her and the control data to Ashline Works. We will secure your cargo, clear your debt record, and arrange passage off Arden Reach." Vaelis turned slowly toward him. Bryce reached for the radio. Maris spoke again before he could shut it off. "You are not responsible for a war, Bryce. Do not become responsible for one because a stranger asked you to." The transmission cut. For a few seconds, only the engine filled the cabin. Vaelis's expression had changed. Not anger, something more careful. "You know him," she said. "He hired me, and he knew your route. He knows a lot of routes. Did you tell him I was here?" "No." "Did you consider it?" Bryce looked at the road ahead. "That is not an answer." He gripped the wheel harder. "I considered every way to keep the people in that bunker alive," he said. "That is what I do. And handing me over was one of them." "No, but you did not tell me. I did not know what the message meant." Vaelis looked out the window. The silence between them became heavier than the dust. The Iron Lark's dash lit with a new icon. A route appeared on the screen, marked in gold. It led directly toward Ashline Works. Bryce stared at it. "Maris sent a guidance package," Vaelis said. "I can see that. Your truck accepted it. It has an open freight receiver. That is how contracts update. You left it open. I did not know he would use it. She leaned forward and shut down the data port with a sharp movement. Now we are blind to any civilian update he might send, Bryce said. Now he cannot guide us into a trap. You do not know that it is a trap. Vaelis looked at him. You do not know that it is not. He had no answer that did not sound thin. They reached the maintenance station an hour later. It sat beneath an old refinery line, hidden behind rusted tanks and buried conduit. Toma led Bryce to a service bay where they could inspect the Iron Lark. The engine was worse than Bryce expected. The heat sink bought us time, Thomas said. Not much more. How much? If we keep the load, maybe one hard run. Bryce nodded. Toma glanced toward the cargo bay. And the power pack? Untouched. For now. Across the bay, Vaelis stood at a dead terminal. She had pulled a cable from the wall and connected it to her device. Her face was pale beneath the dust. Bryce watched her, wanting to say something. He did not know what would make it better. Sela approached him instead. You two are fighting, she said. Is that your professional assessment? It is my assessment as a person who has seen leaders make bad decisions because they are too proud to admit fear. I am not a leader. No, Sela said. You are the man with the truck everyone is following. That is often worse. Bryce looked away. Sela continued. If he offered you a way out, you should say it. People can handle bad news. They cannot handle being managed. That sounds familiar. It should. At the terminal, Vaelis made a sound of frustration. Bryce walked over. What did you find? She did not look at him. The maintenance records. Good or bad? Both. She touched the screen, and a set of old authorization logs appeared. One entry carried her biometric seal. Bryce read the entry slowly. It showed that her continuity protocol had been approved. Your signature? He asked. Yes. What does it do? It keeps the array active if command stations are destroyed. It was meant to stop panic shutdowns during a siege. Her voice was flat. I approved it months ago. Bryce looked at the next layers of code. Most were hidden behind security locks. Can you access those? Not from here. Do you know what they are? Vaelis swallowed. Not exactly. The terminal flashed red, and a new requirement appeared. The array required Vaelis Rhyne's final authorization. She stepped back as though the words had struck her. The records did not arrive as a single confession. They came as damaged fragments, each one worse than the last. Toma brought up a maintenance cache from a relay cabinet. Vaelis compared it to the command log on her device. Bryce stood nearby, holding a lamp over the console because the overhead lights had begun to fail. One file showed that the civilian tags had been copied into a military target table 3 days before the retreat. Another showed that the change had been reviewed by a senior authority, but the name field had been wiped. The third was a small routine attached to Vaelis's old continuity protocol. It did not activate the array. It did something quieter. It made the system hold any final firing record until her biometric pattern was present. Bryce read it twice. They needed you alive. Yes. Why not just use your signature? Because the system checks stress response. It knows the difference between a stored print and a living authorization. Vaelis's jaw tightened. I designed that safeguard. So nobody could fake an order. So nobody could fake an order, she said. And now someone has arranged for me to be in the room when the order is given. Bryce saw the shape of it then. Orvin did not need Vaelis to become a villain. He only needed the system to record her at the moment it did what he wanted. In a war, the record mattered more than the truth if enough people were desperate to believe it. Vaelis shut the file. When I approved the protocol, I believed I was protecting the field crews, she said. We had lost a station in a panic shutdown. A unit had been cut off because the defense grid went dark too early. You were trying to keep people alive. I was trying to make a system reliable. She looked at the red warning light on the terminal. There's a difference. Bryce wanted to tell her she could not carry all of it. The words felt too easy. He had spent years accepting contracts that crossed battle zones because somebody needed freight moved. He had told himself he was separate from the people who paid for the routes. The war had still used him. He sat on an overturned tool crate. Maris found me after I left the rescue corps, he said. Vaelis looked at him. I had a truck that needed repairs, a debt I could not cover, and no interest in wearing another uniform. He offered civilian jobs, fuel, parts, no questions about who owned the road as long as I delivered where I said I would. Bryce rubbed his hands together, remembering the grease that never seemed to leave his skin. I told myself I was keeping people alive. You were. Sometimes. Other times I was keeping a supply chain alive for people who did not care who got crushed under it. Vaelis sat beside him, carefully favoring her injured leg. You did not know what Maris wanted from Sable Array. No, but I knew he did not call just to ask how my day was. The radio on the bench clicked. Maris's signal icon returned, muted but persistent. Bryce stared at it. He will keep offering, Vaelis said. He thinks I need the offer. Do you? The question hurt because the answer was not simple. Bryce had a debt. He had a license that was one failed contract away from suspension. He had no ship, no savings, and a shelter full of people waiting. For a delivery, he had already compromised. Yes, he said. I need it. Vaelis did not flinch. Then why refuse? Because I need to be able to look at myself after. For a moment, Vaelis said nothing. Then she reached toward the terminal and brought up the gold route package Maris had sent. It remained on the hidden freight receiver, waiting like an open door. Bryce stood, took the control pad, and erased it. The map vanished. The radio signal from Maris went silent. Vaelis watched him. You cannot undo that. I know. That was your way out. It was a leash. The maintenance station shook as an impact hit somewhere outside. Dust fell from the ceiling. Vaelis rose slowly. Then we both have fewer choices now, she said. Bryce looked at her. That sound like forgiveness? No. Her eyes were clear, even tired. It sounds like information. Trust is not a switch, Bryce. No, it is not. But it can be rebuilt. The words did not erase what had happened. They made the next step possible. Outside, Sela called for them. The first group of Quiet Line was waiting for a direction. Vaelis picked up her device. Bryce took the tool bag. Together, they walked back into the noise. Bryce stopped beside the maintenance map. The final authorization requirement had made one thing clear. The array needed Vaelis alive, not only to reach its core, but to place her living stress pattern on the record when the strike was ordered. Then the normal override is out, he said. Yes, Vaelis said. We used the fault cycle from Hologate. I open the central locks, and the outer station falls out of sync. That blinds the launchers. If the fault reaches all three guiding stations, yes. Bryce studied the route to Ashline Works. Harlan's units were closing in, and Sela's convoy was already moving through Quiet Line below them. What do you need? Your emergency power pack, my access, and someone at the outer station to keep the relay alive while I break the locks. I can do that, Thomas said. Bryce shook his head. You are civilian. So are most of the people we are trying to keep alive, Thomas said. I'm not asking you to make me brave. I already decided. That stopped Bryce. He had spent too long treating every life as something he alone had to carry, as if refusing help could spare other people the cost. He looked from Toma to Vaelis. All right, but you follow instructions. And no more hidden messages. No more deciding alone what I can handle. Vaelis's expression softened by a fraction. No more hidden routes, she said. Fair. The agreement was not forgiveness, but it gave them a place to stand. Before the gate was struck, Bryce made one last pass through the cargo bay. He touched the remaining filter module, then the emergency power pack, as if the simple act could make the arithmetic kinder. One module for the shelter. One power pack for the array. One truck with barely enough fuel for a chase that might not end. Vaelis stood in the doorway behind him. You can still send the filter module with Sela now, she said. I'm going to. And the power pack? That goes with us. If the relay consumes it, your truck will have no reserve. My truck already made its opinion clear about reserves. She watched him latch the cargo doors. I do not want your sacrifice to become another thing I am responsible for, she said. Bryce faced her. It is not yours alone. I chose the bridge. I chose the route. I chose to erase Maris. You chose to stop the array. Toma chose the relay. Sela chose the convoy. That is the point, right? Nobody gets to decide who pays for everyone else. Vaelis held that thought for a moment. Then she reached up and brushed a smear of dust from his cheek with the back of her fingers. No, she said. Nobody does. The distant engine noise grew louder. Bryce gave the Iron Lark side panel a final pat. Let's make this truck's bad day memorable. The first coalition skimmer hit the outer gate 2 minutes later. Bryce did not wait to see who climbed out. He got the Iron Lark moving. The plan they built in the next half hour was not clean enough to deserve the name. It was a collection of hard choices tied together by time. Sela would take Quiet Line through the Western service roads, using the groups already separated. She would keep transmissions short and move only during the gaps Vaelis marked. The route was narrow, but it avoided the heaviest target zones. Toma would go with Bryce to the outer guiding station at Ashline Works. He would connect the emergency power pack to the relay and keep it stable long enough for Vaelis to trigger the synchronization fault. Vaelis would enter the central control chamber through an old maintenance duct she had felt in the electrical pattern earlier. The same strange rhythm beneath the dust that had warned her about the pit in the industrial district now showed a hidden line around the main security doors. Bryce would use the Iron Lark to draw Harlan's pursuit units and Maris's contractors away from Quiet Line. Nobody liked the plan. That did not make it wrong. Before they left, Bryce found Vaelis beside the cargo bay. She was tightening the strap around her injured leg. Her hands were steady, but her breathing was not. You should rest for 10 minutes, he said. We have less than 2 hours. 10 minutes is not a suggestion. It is an order from the guy with the truck. You are not my commander. Thank God. I will be terrible at paperwork. She almost smiled. He crouched beside her and checked the brace on her leg. The cut beneath it had been cleaned, but the swelling had gotten worse. You cannot push the signal sense too hard, he said. I know. No, you know it is information. I need you to know it as a limit. She looked down at him. You are learning, she said. Slowly, painfully, probably not in time. For a moment, neither moved. Then Vaelis placed her hand over his wrist. You did not have to erase the route Maris gave you, she said. Yes, I did. You could have kept it. And then what? Pretend it was just there in case. Her fingers tightened slightly. I would not have blamed you for wanting a way out. I would have blamed me. She held his gaze. That was the closest either of them had come to saying what mattered. Then Sela called from the door. Time. Bryce stood. The Iron Lark rolled out of the maintenance station with one filter module still secured in the cargo bay, the emergency power pack strapped beside it, and more people depending on it than it had been built to carry. The first pursuit vehicle appeared on the ridge behind them. Bryce turned the truck toward Ashline Works. Vaelis watched the road ahead. Try not to destroy your vehicle, she said. Bryce looked at the smoke rising over the factory district. I'll do my best. You say that before every terrible plan. That is because I'm consistent. Then the war opened its teeth, and they drove into it. Sela took the map from Vaelis and spread it across the hood of a burned-out service cart. The route that remained was not much more than a sequence of brief windows between sensor sweeps. We cannot move all 3 groups at the same pace, she said. Bryce looked at the markers. The middle group is too slow. The middle group has the injured. I know. If we force them to keep up, they will break down in the open. If we wait for them, the fast group loses the western gap. Vaelis pointed to a set of maintenance alleys. There is a shallow culvert here. The array cannot see below the upper lip unless a drone marks the position. Sela considered it. How many vehicles? 4 at a time. Then the first group moves through. The second waits under cover. The third carries messages. Bryce shook his head. No messages. No one walks between those groups in this dust. I was not asking anyone to walk, Sela said. She tapped the 2 small utility carts, still working. We run the carts on short loops. Lights covered. 1 horn pattern for stop, 2 for move. Bryce looked at the civilians around them. They were tired. Some were frightened enough to follow any instruction. Others had passed beyond fear into a hard, practical quiet. Sela had learned their names. Bryce realized that from the way she spoke to them. Not all of them, perhaps, but enough. You can hold that together? He asked. I've been holding it together since the first road closed, she said. I do not need a truck to do it. Bryce nodded. Then it is yours. It was a small sentence. It cost him more than it should have. Sela's expression shifted, surprised, then firm. It is ours, she said. You guessed the gap. We get ourselves through it. Toma checked the emergency pack one last time. I will need a cable spool, the module bracket, and 10 minutes. Inside the relay room. Less if the old contacts are not fused. They will be fused, Bryce said. Probably. And if the array hits, then I will have bigger concerns than fused contacts. Vaelis handed Toma a small signal device. This will pulse once when the array enters its final cycle, she said. Do not connect the pack before that. If you do, the system will see a power surge and isolate the station. Toma turned the device over in his hand. One pulse, then connect. Got it. If it pulses twice, Vaelis added, do not connect. That means the central lock stayed closed. Bryce looked at her. She met his eyes. You need to know the limits. No, he said. I need you to make the first pulse happen. I intend to. A distant boom rolled across the basin. It was not Sable Array. Not yet. It was ordinary artillery, the kind of violence that had become background noise to people who had lived too long near a front. Sela began moving the groups. Bryce watched the convoy split into its planned rhythm. One vehicle rolled, then another. A covered lamp flashed once beneath the culvert lip. The next group waited. Vaelis stood beside him, her device held close. Do you regret stopping at glass span? She asked. Bryce saw the answer in the moving line of people. No, he said, even with the cost. Ask me after we survive the cost. Her voice softened. That is fair. For the first time since the scout craft, they stood together without needing to argue about the next direction. Then the first pulse came from the signal device in Toma's hand. The array's final cycle had begun. Bryce climbed into the Iron Lark. Vaelis moved toward the duct entrance. Neither said goodbye. They had work to do. Ashline works had been built for heavy refining, not for a running battle. That was why Bryce liked it. The factories were a maze of pressure pipes, conveyor channels, storage silos, and skeletal loading towers. The old automation grid still flickered on and off as distant power systems failed. Every few minutes, a line of machinery woke, moved something useless, and shut down again. Toma sat behind Bryce in the cab, holding the emergency pack against the seat frame with both hands. If this thing gets hit, Toma said, we all become a cautionary tale. Then hold it tighter. That is not how physics works. Never stopped me before. Vaelis's voice came through the short-range radio from the maintenance duct entrance. I am inside. Bryce checked the signal. Status. Security systems are waking. Harlan's units are between you and the central chamber. Good. I'll make them move. Bryce. He paused. Do not make them move toward quiet line. I know. The radio clicked off. Ahead, 3 skimmers emerged from behind a row of storage tanks. Arlan's vehículos. Behind them, 2 darker armored transports came through a side gate. Maris's people. Bryce smiled without humor. Everybody brought friends. He turned the Iron Lark toward the narrowest lane. The lead skimmer fired a warning burst across the road. Bryce did not slow. The Iron Lark smashed through a hanging barrier and entered a corridor barely wide enough for its mirrors. Pipes ran along both walls. Above, conveyor belts crossed like bridges. The skimmers followed. Bryce watched the factory's old control map on a cracked side display. Toma had spent the last 15 minutes explaining the sequence of the automated equipment. Next cycle? Bryce asked. 30 seconds. Maybe. The grid is unstable. Today is full of maybes. He hit the truck's auxiliary transmitter. A pulse went into the factory network through a service port. At first, nothing happened. Then the conveyor belts above them came alive. Heavy or bins began rolling across the overhead tracks. The lead skimmer tried to accelerate beneath them. Bryce slammed the brakes. The Iron Lark stopped just before cross lane. The skimmer behind him had no room to stop. It swerved around the truck and entered the cross lane at speed. An Orbin dropped from the conveyor above. It hit the ground directly in front of the skimmer. The vehicle clipped it, spun sideways, and crashed into a bank of pipes. Steam burst across the corridor. Bryce drove through the cloud before the others could see him. Nice, Thomas said. Thank you. That was not a compliment. You nearly got us cooked. Still nice. A shot hit the rear. Armor. The Iron Lark lurched. Warning lights lit the dash. Fuel pressure falling. Bryce kept driving. He led the pursuers deeper into Ashline Works, through lanes where their heavy weapons could not fire without bringing down supports or rupturing chemical lines. He used the truck's mass to knock open gates, then let the automated systems close them behind him. Every time Harlan's skimmers found a clear angle, Bryce took it away. At the outer guiding station, a low concrete structure stood between two cooling towers. Toma pointif. There. Bryce swung the truck behind it. We have 3 minutes, Thomas said. We have whatever we have. Bryce opened the cargo bay. Together, they carried the emergency power pack into the station. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, the relay chamber was a room of old panels and thick power conduits. Most were dark. One narrow strip of lights glowed along the floor. Toma found the interface port. Pack goes here. Filter module there. Bryce looked at the last intact filter module. The shelter needs this. The relay needs the module's capacitor matrix. It does not consume it. If the housing holds, we can pull it back out. If. Toma gave him a look. Bryce nodded. They moved fast. The module slid into a mounting bracket. The power pack connected with a deep click. Lights came on across the room. Outside, engines approached. Toma's hands flew across the controls. I can keep the relay stable, he said. But once she starts the fault cycle, the system will pull power hard. If the connection drops, it resets. What do you need? Time. And for you to keep everyone off us. Bryce looked toward the door. You know how to disconnect the module? Yes. Do it as soon as the load drops. Toma nadif. Bryce stepped back outside. Harlan's remaining skimmer appeared at the end of the lane. The dark transports of Maris's contractors came from the other side. Trapped. He climbed into the Iron Lark. The engine made a sound that did not inspire confidence. Just one more run, Bryce told it. The truck moved. Inside the central control chamber, Vaelis crawled through a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for her shoulders. The electrical field pressed against her senses like a storm behind her eyes. At every junction, she felt the array's pulse. 3 short beats, 1 long beat, then a pause. The same pattern she had noticed under the industrial floor. It led her around the main security doors and into the chamber from above. Below, the room was brighter than she expected. Orvin Tal stood at the central console, his uniform clean despite the battle outside. Harlan Key was beside him, armor marked by dust and impact scars. 2 other coalition officers worked at separate panels. Orvin looked up as Vaelis dropped from the shaft. I knew you would find a maintenance line, he said. Vaelis kept her weapon lowered but ready. You left it open. I left you a choice. You left a trail. Same thing sometimes. Harlan stepped forward. Vaelis, the corridor is unstable. We need the array under control. It is under control, she said. That is the problem. Orvin touched the central display. The map of Darson corridor glowed between them. Civilian markers moved through quiet line. Frontier forces are gathering at Ashline Works, Orvin said. You can shift the target priority. One command. Their armor is removed. Our people live. And the civilians? Your people will have a corridor. My people are in that corridor. Orvin's expression did not change. War does not allow perfect choices. Vaelis felt the old training rise in her. The doctrine that said sacrifice was sometimes necessary. The language that made a map look cleaner when it hid faces. Then she saw the target codes. Not military. Not civilian. Mixed. Orvin had set the system to fire wherever it would create the most useful damage. You changed the identity weights, she said. He did not deny it. Harlan looked from the screen to Orvin. What does that mean? It means we're dealing with an imperfect system, Orvin said. It means you built the failure, Vaelis replied. Orvin's eyes hardened. I built an outcome our side could survive. You built a massacre you could blame on someone else. Harlan's jaw tightened. Outside, through the structure, a distant explosion rolled across the ground. Orvin turned back to Vaelis. Authorize the shift. You retain your rank. You retain your command. The record will show you prevented a frontier assault. And if I refuse, the array fires as programmed. The record will show you failed to act. Vaelis looked at the main console. The normal override waited for her biometric signature. The false synchronization fault required the hidden internal locks to be opened in sequence. She had only seconds between each step, and Bryce needed to be in place. Her radio clicked. Bryce's voice, rough through static. "We're ready." Vaelis kept her gaze on Orvin. "I need a moment," she said. Orvin nodded, as if he had expected nothing else. She moved toward the console. Her fingers touched the biometric plate. The system recognized her. The display confirmed her access. Orvin watched closely. Vaelis opened the first maintenance layer beneath the command screen. The alarms began. Harlan moved. "What are you doing?" "Correcting the system." Orvin lunged for the console. Vaelis slammed her palm onto the secondary controls. The hidden locks opened one by one. At Ashline Works, the outer relay surged. Toma cried out over the radio. "Load spike." "Bryce, I need another minute." Bryce was already in motion. The Iron Lark burst from behind a storage tank and headed straight toward Maris's lead transport. At the last second, he cut left. The transport followed. It had to. The truck still carried the power feed they wanted. Bryce led it into a yard where old chemical carriers sat on tracks. He triggered the yard control. A line of automated haulers rolled across the exit. The transport slammed into one and stopped. The second contractor vehicle tried to cut around. Harlan Skimmer came in from the other side, firing warning shots at both. Nobody trusted anybody. That was Bryce's advantage. He drove the Iron Lark through a maintenance gate. The truck's right side scraped hard. A panel tore loose. Fuel pressure dropped again. "Come on," he said. The truck made it into the open lane beside the guiding station. A missile struck the ground behind him. The blast lifted the rear wheels. The Iron Lark landed crooked, engine screaming. Inside the relay room, Thomas shouted, "Connection is unstable." Bryce saw a cable line running from the station to the truck's exterior port. The hit had pulled it half free. He jumped out into the dust. Another shot hit the concrete wall. Bryce grabbed the cable, forced the connector back into place, and locked it with both hands. Electric current surged through the metal. His gloves smoked. He held on until the lock engaged. Then he stumbled back, shaking out his hands. "Tell me that did it," he said into the radio. Thomas' voice came back. "It did it. Do not do that again." Noted. In the central chamber, Vaelis heard the relay come alive through the system. The synchronization fault window opened. Orvin grabbed her arm. She twisted free, drove her elbow into his chest, and hit the final command. Harlan reached for the emergency override. Vaelis saw the hesitation in his face. "You know what he did?" she said. Harlan looked at the target map. The mixed codes. The preloaded civilian markers. Orvin shouted, "Do it!" Harlan did not. That half-second was enough. Vaelis pushed the fault cycle through all three guiding stations. Every alarm in the chamber fired at once. The system reported phase desynchronization, then confirmed that the automatic safety lock had engaged. A final warning said the last launch cycle had already begun. Vaelis's blood went cold. The system had already primed one cluster of launchers. It could not cancel the last cycle. It could only redirect it. Her senses flared against the electrical field. Pain tore through her head. She found a pattern. 3 short beats, 1 long beat, then a pause. A buried service path ran from the chamber toward the old maintenance axis. It was not on any map because it had been installed before the array's current command structure. She sent the coordinates to Bryce. "Get to this line," she said. "Now." "Where are you?" Bryce asked. "Inside. Vaelis. The line is the only safe path. Are you coming out?" "I will." That was not a promise. It was a decision she had not yet proven she could keep. The chamber lights flickered. Orvin ran for a side exit. Harlan caught his arm. "You knew," Harlan said. Orvin shoved him away. "We do not have time for this." "You knew." The final launch warning pulsed overhead. Vaelis did not wait for them. She turned toward the maintenance shaft. Her legs failed on the first step. Pain flooded her senses. The electrical field had become a blind, white pressure. She could not tell where the walls were. She could barely tell which way was up. She pressed one hand to the floor and listened to the pulses through her palm. 3 short beats, 1 long beat, then a pause. Follow the pause. Outside, Bryce saw the coordinates appear on the dash. The safe line ran across a broken field between launch vents. It was narrow, winding, and impossible to see through the dust. The Iron Lark's engine was failing. Quiet line was visible in the distance, a string of small vehicles moving west. He could turn toward them. He could protect the convoy. He could survive the next minute. But Vaelis was still inside. Bryce looked at the tower above the central chamber. Then he turned the truck around. The Iron Lark protested. "So do I," he told it. He drove toward the maintenance axis. The first launcher fired. A deep impact shook the ground far to the north. The shot had been redirected toward empty rock, but the blast wave still hit Ashline Works hard enough to knock loose panels from the factory walls. The second launcher began to charge. Bryce found a maintenance exit just as the ground split beside it. Vaelis emerged from the darkness on one knee. She was alone. Bryce opened the passenger door. "Get in." She looked up, disoriented. "You came back. Don't sound so surprised. You gave me coordinates. I told you to follow the safe line." "I'm following the safe line. It happens to include you." She tried to stand. Failed. Bryce jumped out, lifted her into the cab, and strapped her in. The second launcher fired. The shockwave hit the Iron Lark broadside. The truck slid across the broken ground. Bryce fought the wheel. Vaelis's hand caught his forearm. "Left," she said. "Can't see." "Left now." He turned. The truck missed a launch vent by inches. The ground behind them erupted as the final shot tore into the empty basin. The Iron Lark's engine died. For a moment, they coasted in silence. Then the truck came to rest behind a ridge of broken concrete. Bryce leaned forward over the wheel. Vaelis's breathing was shallow. "You all right?" he asked. "No. Good. Me neither." She looked at him through the dust-streaked cabin. Despite everything, she laughed once. Outside, the alarms of Sable Array faded one by one. The ground stopped vibrating. The system was gone. For several minutes, neither of them moved. Then the short-range radio cracked alive. Sela's voice came through. "Bryce. Vaelis. Quiet line is through the Western Gap. Everyone is accounted for. Toma is hurt, but not badly. The last filter module is with us." He pulled it before the relay burned out. Bryce closed his eyes. "The shelter? The damaged module is gone," Sela said. "But the intact one is still working. We can get it there." It was not the delivery he had promised. It was enough to matter. They climbed out of the Iron Lark together. The truck sat crooked in the dust, scarred and silent. Bryce rested one hand on the hood. "You did good," he said. Vaelis stood beside him, leaning slightly on his shoulder. "Is that a human ritual?" she asked. "Sometimes. It was a vehicle. It was family." She looked at the truck, then at him. "I understand." Far across the basin, the first hints of ceasefire came not as speeches or signals, but as stillness. Coalition units stopped advancing toward the corridor. Frontier vehicles held position near the broken factories. Nobody knew yet what had happened inside the array. Everyone knew the system was no longer firing. The civilians in quiet line kept moving. That was all that mattered for the moment. By the time Bryce and Vaelis reached the convoy, the dust had begun to thin. Toma lay on a stretcher beside one of the vehicles, conscious and annoyed. "You look terrible," Bryce told him. "You should see the relay." "I did." Sela handed Bryce the remaining filter module. Its casing was scorched, but the status light glowed steady. "The emergency cell is gone," she said, "but the filter works. That will keep the shelter alive. For a while." "For tonight," Bryce said. "Tonight is enough." Vaelis stood nearby, quiet. Harlan Kiev had not come out of the central chamber. Nobody knew whether he had survived the shutdown. Orvental had vanished into confusion before the final cycle. Bryce knew that was not a clean ending. Wars rarely gave those. But the logs remained. Hollowgate had copies. The maintenance station had copies. Sela's convoy carried cached route data and target maps on civilian devices. The proof was scattered too widely to disappear in one order. It would not stop the war overnight. It would make the next lie harder. As the convoy prepared to move, Bryce found Vaelis standing at the edge of the road. The first pale light of morning touched the dust around her. "You have nowhere to go," he said. She did not turn. Neither do you. I have a damaged filter module and a convoy heading to a bunker. That is not a home. No. She looked at him then. Her uniform was torn. Her rank markings were gone. The coalition would call her traitor. The opposing side would call her an asset if they could catch her. Neither description fit. What will you do? She asked. Bryce considered the question. He had spent years moving between contracts, telling himself that staying independent meant staying free. But independence had not protected him from Maris's offer. It had only made the offer possible. Sela was already organizing the next stretch of road. Toma was giving instructions from his stretcher. The people of Quiet Line were checking tires, sharing water, carrying one another where they could. We get them to the shelter, Bryce said. Then we see who else needs a road. Vaelis watched him. That is not a plan. It is a direction. She stepped closer. And if I come with you? Bryce looked at her hand resting at her side. He did not take it immediately. Then you make your own choices, he said. Same as always. A small smile touched her face. That is better than trust, she said. Bryce remembered the tunnel. Her first promise. I thought you said you would earn it. I did. He held out his hand. This time, when she took it, no urgency forced them together. There was no falling bridge, no warning siren, and no bargain made under pressure. Only a choice. They walked back toward the convoy as the first vehicles started moving west. No one called it victory. The road ahead was still dangerous, and the wider war was not over. But a path existed, and for Bryce, that was enough to keep driving. If this story stayed with you, please like the video, share it with someone who loves meaningful sci-fi stories, and subscribe for more journeys across the stars. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep looking toward the sky.